Now let us make the four boundless qualities shine forth. I will abide, pervading 1/4, with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading 1/4, with a mind imbued with compassion. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with compassion, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading 1/4, with a mind imbued with gladness. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with gladness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading 1/4, with a mind imbued with equanimity. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with equanimity, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. And we'll take some time, settle in the comfortable posture for the meditation time now. And it's useful to sense this inner confidence as we show up now to the experience of our body. We rely on this inner confidence, simple and true, not imagined, not contrived, but the simple truth that I care about this life, I care about this moment, and that it's possible for the heart to care enough to keep the moment, the present moment experience in mind. So the basic fundamental motivation in our practice is this self-compassion. And it's not imagined, it's actually something that we can tap into over and over and over. I care enough to be close. And a simple phrase can be a helpful reminder that I do, in fact, this mind, this heart does, in fact, care enough to be close, to connect with our experience as it actually is. That we care enough to feel what's here to feel. Some of you know that Thich Nhat Hanh, this wonderful Vietnamese Buddhist monk and really powerful teacher who died about 8 days ago, he used a lot when he was teaching and in his own practice, these gathas, these phrases, basically ways of reminding ourselves what our good heart is capable of. And so one set of 4 phrases that Thich Nhat Hanh recommends and used. First one is, "Dear one, I'm here for you." And so we can just use that, just speaking directly to our own life, our heart, our body right here. Dear one, honey, I'm here for you. I'm not afraid to be here for you. This moment as it is, these feelings, these sensations as they are, I'm here for you. So we're giving ourselves, we're actually giving everybody the gift of presence, this mindful awareness, this present moment awareness. I'm not afraid to be open. I'm not afraid to feel and sense what's here to feel and sense. And to give, or trust rather, the heart's capacity to just let everything move. And to open up this space even more, to undo any sense of being alone. The next phrase, the next gatha, as it's called, that teaching phrase or teaching reminder that Thich Nhat Hanh recommends. Darling, I know you are there and I'm so happy. So this is a statement reminding ourselves that we're not alone. I know that my Sangha, I know that my dear ones, I know that my own good heart is there. And that makes me so happy. So just repeat that phrase, darling, I know you are there and I'm so happy. But you can interpret the phrase in the most open way. Darling, I know you are there and I'm so happy. Recognizing the presence of all others, or even the presence of the totality here and now. You know, awareness, even the awareness that we sense, it's not just our awareness. It's just the habit of interpreting it one particular way. And then the third phrase, dear one, I know you are suffering, and that is why I'm here for you. And we could expand this something like, dear one, all my honeys, all my darlings, I know that there is suffering here and there and everywhere. And that's why I'm willing to open and be present. And that's why I'm willing to include. Dear one, I know you are suffering, and that is why I'm here for you. So just repeat that a few times. And interestingly, the fourth kata or phrase that Thich Nhat Hanh offers, it may seem kind of going backwards, but it's really profound not to be afraid of our own suffering and not to be afraid of that very personal sense of wanting help. Like freedom doesn't have to be afraid of asking for help. So the fourth phrase is that you can repeat, dear one, and you can make that plural, dear ones. You can speak to the whole world. You can speak to your own good self, your own good heart. Dear one, I am suffering. Please help. So really feeling that personal connection to your own suffering, really allowing it to touch our hearts, but not being afraid of our own suffering. Dear one, I am suffering. Please help. So go through these four phrases one more time. I'll just say them and I'll pause and you can repeat them a few times. Then I'll go on to the next one. And just connect to the words, just let the words have their effect on the heart and mind. Dear ones, I am here for you. Darling, I know you are there, and I am so happy. Dear one, I know you are suffering, and that is why I am here for you. Dear one, I am suffering. Please help. And remember, as you use these during the sit today and during your life, it's really important that you open up the idea of who you're speaking to your own goodness, speaking to all the beneficent beings that care, that love, speaking to your dear ones, your personal dear ones in your life, family and friends, speaking to all beings without exception. And it's just a way to access the goodness of our own heart that's here and now, to reestablish, and you can check right now, to reestablish confidence that this heart here and now, this heart has this real capacity for this trustworthy love. And it isn't love just for a specific person or being. It's love really for its own sake. because it's good, it's healing, it's a way of belonging, to trust this goodness of the heart that cares and wishes well. So to whatever degree we can now, let's all attune to the goodness of this heart, this capacity of our heart to be good, to be generous, to be kind, to be happy, to include each other, to include the world and all of its messiness and imperfection. It's really the gift of non-fear, not afraid of our own habits and not afraid of our friends and all of their habits, good and bad. But we're uncovering the heart that knows how to include it all, even the parts of our lives that are really confusing and unclear. I'm not afraid of confusion. I'm not afraid of negativity and pain. I'm not afraid of joy and goodness, because I trust this heart that knows how to include it all, knows how to feel everything that's there to feel. A heart that knows how to be open and inclusive. And we're not saying that the confidence is perfect or fully developed. All we're saying is that there's some confidence that this heart is good. And we're keeping it in mind. That's our job as a practitioner now. Keeping the goodness of the heart in mind. And you can use memories or mental images. You can go back to some of the phrases you've used before, or the new ones you learned today from Thich Nhat Hanh. But we're keeping the goodness of this heart in mind. The heart that trusts being open and inclusive, even open and inclusive to memories and experiences that are difficult, hard to bear, and hard to feel. And as we keep this goodness in mind, notice its generous or expansiveness, just like a light, a warm and generous light will shine out, go out in all directions. Everything can be touched by the light. There's that same sense of the goodness in the heart, that it's happy to shine out, radiate out in all directions. Nobody has to be excluded, no thing excluded. Just radiant goodness. And first and foremost, we feel it in the heart itself and in our body, until there's that sense that nothing here in this body and mind is untouched, unaffected by this goodness. So notice that healing effect of keeping the good heart in mind, a kind of generous softening and opening of the body, of the tender heart, the fragmented or tight mind. Love is like a healing balm, and we allow it to have its effect. And we allow the love to keep expanding until it seems to be boundless. The heart so open and radiant that it appears that nothing is untouched. Everything is affected by this goodness. The world, of course, is still the world. The body is still the body. The habits of the mind are still what they are. But there's this good heart that can hold it all, include it all. No fear, no division in the heart. yeah, this is how it is now. And I'm here for you. I'm not afraid. See if you can truly trust this boundless expanse of goodness, as if we're going to rest back, abide, be this expansive love that includes ourselves, includes everybody, the totality. And we'll continue in silence for about 12 minutes or so. Just keep coming back and use phrases and mental images as you need, but really sense the freedom, like freedom from fear, freedom from hate and division that this heart is capable of. Even if it's temporary or fragile, build one's confidence. Is this heart capable of opening and including in a good way now? Is this heart capable of expressing non-fear or love in a real way, here and now? And if so, then can this be trusted? May this goodness continue. May it increase. May it never end. It's really helpful to imagine relating all day long from this place of this generous goodness of heart. Maybe it's actually a very functional attitude or way of being, way of relating that could be used all day long. This open-hearted, sensitive, responsive, generous heart. And maybe it would allow us to be fierce when we need to be fierce, and quiet when that would be the appropriate response, and just how to respond appropriately, creatively, moment by moment in our lives. But the most important thing to reflect on this last minute or two is this sense of freedom, the freedom in love. In the same way, we've all learned that being identified with hate and fear is a real prison for us. Can we notice the opposite, that when the heart is open, kind and generous, caring and tender, that there's a real direct, immediate experience of freedom here and now. The freedom of the heart being relatively empty of fear, empty of hate, empty of division. It's really useful to be able to sense or intuit this quality of freedom, the heart not so bound, not so bound up. So let's just take another minute and trust and abide with that sense of freedom here and now. Good to be with everyone this morning. Feel free to adjust your body. So I put into the chat the Sunday resources you can open up at some point. And Nancy from Portland has also put an email if anybody lives in the Portland area. Nancy's considering starting a sitting group there where people would listen to the Sunday morning talk and then be able to connect in person with each other for the small group time. And we'll be having small groups at the end of this program at 11:45 Central Time. I think Shannon is here this morning to help with that. And we've been this month mostly talking about freedom. And I've been mentioning to all of us that, I think appropriately, we have a little bit of skepticism, because what the Buddha says and what other people say, it's pretty provocative that there is an end to suffering. That's, there are these three instructions. There is suffering, and we should see our suffering as a teacher. That's the first, what we call in Buddhism, early Buddhism, the first noble truth. There is the pervasive experience of dissatisfaction, even when we have nice conditions. We have things the way we want them to be. If we're honest, if we look carefully, we'll see there's still insecurity even when we're really experiencing a lot of good fortune. And then there's the second noble truth, that there's a cause, there's a reason for that pervasive dissatisfaction and uneasiness, which is the heart mistakenly is trying to get some nutriment from experience. We're demanding real satisfaction from something that can't deliver it. And the classic example many of us know is like an intimate relationship with another human being, or an intimate relationship with a four-legged being, where we're trying to get some permanent satisfaction from our dog, our cat, our partner, our kids, our parents, or some, person who we want their love, we want them to see us a particular way. And even if we somehow manage to get them to like us in the way we want to be liked, or to see us in the way we want to be seen, we realize that uneasiness in our heart, that kind of quivering and existential uneasiness, still there, even when we get what we think we want, let alone when we don't get what we want, when we're living with a lot of difficulty in life. So that's the second noble truth, that there's a cause trying through attachment and identification to calm the uneasiness in our hearts. And then the Buddha says, but there is an end to suffering. That's the third noble truth. There is a way to experience the heart unbounded, not in the grip of greed, not in the grip of hate. That's pretty profound. Like, you mean even when I have a body, even when I have a life, even when I live in a messy world where there's a lot of real injustice, a lot of suffering all around, even here and now, this heart can express that unwavering openness, freedom, love. And maybe you even tasted a little bit of it during the guided meditation. This is, to have a sense of the freedom that the Buddha experienced and that a lot of our spiritual ancestors experienced. This is bringing metta, bringing loving kindness to mind is one of the most available ways to get a taste. I'm remembering, as some of you know, Joseph Goldstein, one of my really important teachers and sort of one of our elders in the sort of Western early Buddhism, Western insight meditation tradition. And one of Joseph's teachers was this woman, Dipa Ma, and she was really one of, a contemporary awakened person who practiced in Burma because her family lived there, even though she was from India. And she returned to India later in her life, but she was there. I think her husband was in the civil service in the Burmese sort of colonial government. And then one of her kids died, her husband died, and the pain of that loss was so great. She went to the monastery and one of the Mahasi Center in Rangoon, and practiced and had real success in her practice and became quite wise and free. And Joseph's description of watching Dipa Ma, just do a simple bow, it's sort of love bowing to love, right? It's like that it isn't somebody giving love or somebody receiving love. It's just love being love, freedom being free. some of you know in one of the early Buddhist texts, the Path of Purification, there's this wonderful little excerpt, something like doing without a doer, suffering without a sufferer. And that's a really, I think, wise teaching, because we have that perception, that way of understanding or experiencing, like, yeah, there's doing, but no doer. Like some of you get that even dancing or doing some sports or walking or jogging or whatever. And there's sense of activity without anybody doing the activity. Just like there are times when there's a lot of wisdom, there may feel like, oh yeah, there's this profound feeling of loss, but there's nobody burdened, nobody tight, nobody owning that pain of loss. And so maybe you've had this experience when you've been grieving, not all the time, of course, but in moments where you've really learned to be unafraid of the pain of grief, the pain of loss. And then you have that experience, like there's grief, there's the pain of loss that's moving, and there's nobody resisting, no friction, no problem with that movement of grief, that movement of the pain of loss. And it's sort of this paradoxical experience of being free, but from a subjective, ordinary human experience, there's somebody experiencing a lot of loss. But in those moments, there's a real freedom with the pain of loss. Hard to talk about, actually. But that's the freedom that the Buddhist teachings point to. And that can be the conversation in the small groups later this morning. You know, what is our experience of feeling freedom through the trust in the heart's goodness? Because like I mentioned a moment ago, it's considered one of the most available ways to taste that freedom. When we, that capacity to be loving is there, but we have, it's not necessarily developed. And especially in some of us, where what's developed is the habit of being irritated or being, bothered and critical and judgmental, and those are the or wanting something more, wanting to be seen more, wanting nicer experience. So even though it's pretty nice, I want more of it, or I want to own it so it doesn't go away. So we have a lot of developed habits. So we can instead train the heart to keep that expansive, generous, even boundless quality of love, or whatever word you want to use, that inner goodness, but to keep it in mind. And I really encourage all of us to do that. Dipa Ma, this, you can actually see Dipa Ma's picture behind me. We have them in a lot of our altars, the picture of Dipa Ma. And she's come to the West a few times, to IMS in Massachusetts, before she passed away, maybe 20 years ago or so. But another thing Dipa Ma said once to one of the teachers is, I don't really experience a difference between metta and mindfulness. And so when we say like keeping metta in mind, it's really this part of Buddhist awareness practice where, the nature of awareness, of wisdom and awareness, what we call mindful awareness, its very nature is to be inclusive. Like, oh, it's like this. This is being known. Now it's like this. Whether it's really painful or really beautiful, awareness has this capacity to show up, to include, oh yeah, this is what's being felt. This is what's being seen. This is what's being known. And that's a lot like a trustworthy spiritual love, isn't it? Love, that, like when we think about those people that have that saintly capacity to be loving, maybe it was your grandfather or your grandmother, or maybe you had some benefactor in your life who had that quality well developed in them. And it was like, it didn't come and go. That's sort of the definition of someone who has really developed this quality, is that it's pervasiveness. It's like becomes part of their character. You can kind of depend on it. And that's where we want to get, because it, first and foremost, it's such a gift to oneself to know that I can trust my heart to be kind and tender and appreciative and balanced, no matter the twists and turns of my circumstance. It's liberating to have some confidence that no matter what happens to me or around me, the heart knows how to be loving. And that's really the experience of this spiritual love, or metta, or you can, call it your goodness, the inherent goodness of the heart. It has that nimble ability to show up and include no matter the particular situation at hand. That's how we recognize it. Yes to this too, yes to this, and yes to this. I don't have to be afraid here. I don't need to be afraid there, no matter the twists and turns. And this really helps us understand the intersection between wisdom and love. Wisdom really brings that, love is this exposure, this saying yes, right? And the wisdom aspect of that universal love is like it teaches love how to be even, how to be steady and unwavering, like that aspect of equanimity with that friendliness, with that tenderness that can see suffering. But there's that sort of foundational balance, that heart is unshakable in the midst of joy, in the midst of sorrow. And then, of course, love brings something to wisdom too, right? It brings this more embodied, makes wisdom more embodied, more grounded and real because of love's capacity to include, to be close. So I really find that valuable, to really see what does love bring to how it really helps wisdom mature, and how wisdom helps the experience of love to mature. And not to really separate them out as two different experiences. So again, just to review, like for those who are able to stay with Shannon and do some small groups for the last 15 minutes between 11:45 and noon, you can talk about how you've experienced the prison of hate and fear, and how you've experienced the opposite, like when hate and fear has been replaced with an openness, with love and wisdom, then what's the taste of that freedom? Where have you experienced that in your life? What's that experience like? So the freedom of love and the prison of hate for a topic. And again, even if you're not able to stay or don't want to stay for the small groups, find your own way to reflect on it. You might have a good Dharma friend or spiritual friend at home that you connect with during the week. Then share this. There's something about opening up. I mean, it's important that you have someone who knows how to listen and not to judge, so that it's really a safe space. But this is a powerful way to deepen our practice, is to cultivate these spiritual friends, whether you do it in these ways we help create here at Common Ground, but also finding your own way at home. And you can probably even do it in terms of journaling. And the difference between these two worlds of the world of wisdom and love that has the flavor of freedom, that's how we learn, that's how we find our way, as we intuit, taste that quality of freedom, the heart not being bound. And the same way, that's how we get familiar with the prison of hate and the prison of fear and the prison of lust, is we feel the constriction. We notice something's bound up, something doesn't feel right. And some of you remember, I think I mentioned it not that long ago in one of the Sunday morning talks, but there's an indigenous story here from, I think, the Cheyenne tradition, the Native Americans nation of the Cheyenne people. And it's usually told as one of the elders talking to one of their grandchildren about, a story, or sometimes it's told that the child comes to the elder, to the grandparent, and says, I'm having trouble in my life with somebody who's bothering me or mistreating me, and I really hate them, or I want to get even with them. And then the elder tells the story about, how they too have like two wolves in their heart, and one is quite good and generous and wise and free and fearless, and the other one just wants to burn everything down and eat everything up and tear everything apart. And then the child asks the elder, well, who wins? Sort of the obvious question. And the wise elder has the great response, well, depends which one you feed. And this is the thing about, this is a nice, simple description of our situation. Because in a way, whenever we're, it's not about being angry, it's being identified with the hate, being like willing to be the person, the one who's afraid, identifying with fear, identifying with greed, the one who needs, the one who will be happy only if I get X, Y, and Z. It's that identification or that attachment. That's what feeds the wolf that's going to eat everything up and burn everything down. And it's the same. We can develop and cultivate and feed and eventually really trust and abide with freedom, with love, with wisdom, if we feed it. And we feed it by keeping it in mind. And it's interesting how it's kind of a principle in Jungian psychology, you know, how in a funny way we're more afraid of being good than we are about being bad. It's like, I think the way it's described in it's sort of psychological terms is that if we really start to own, recognize and own the capacity of the heart to be wise and good, then we'll feel obliged, like, oh, I have to, you know, it's almost like I'm kind of attached to being bad and narrow and tight and mean, you know? So if I really honestly recognize this capacity for goodness and wisdom, I'll have to say goodbye to what I've learned to trust, you know, my, you know, constricted nature. This is from Robert Johnson, who's a Jungian analyst. It's in one of Jack Kornfield's book. He's quoting this person, Robert A. Johnson. Curiously, people resist the noble aspects of their shadow more strenuously than they hide their dark sides. It's more disrupting to find that you have a profound nobility of character than to find out that you are a bum. And the Buddha, of course, says, you know, if it weren't possible to manifest real freedom, real love and wisdom in your life, I wouldn't tell you that it's possible. But because it is possible, I tell you, you know, it's possible. And I wouldn't tell you that it's possible to abandon these narrow, constricted habits of hate and fear and greed. But because it is possible to go beyond, to abandon, I tell you, it's possible. And again, remembering Thich Nhat Hanh, who passed away recently, here's a quote. He's talking about the same thing. And Dan sent me this recently from something that he had come across, one of our program hosts. And it's from Thich Nhat Hanh, and it goes like this. Sometimes I feel caught between two opposing selves, the false self imposed by society and what I would call my true self. How often we confuse the two and also assume society's mold to be our true self. Battles between our two selves rarely result in a peaceful reconciliation. Our mind becomes a battlefield on which the five aggregates, form, feeling, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness of our being, are strewn about like debris in a hurricane. Trees topple, branches snap, houses crash. And that's when we misinterpret the teaching and we feel like the good wolf has to devour and get rid of the bad wolf, you know, or my love has to conquer hate. All we need to do is keep in mind what's present. So when hate is present and fear is present, right? Because what knows how to show up honestly and see that hate or fear or denial or lust and greed, like if only I get this, then I'll be okay. Only love and wisdom know how to understand and see, oh, it's like this now. So we don't have to get rid of these so-called negative habits of mind. We meet them because that intention to see clearly is wisdom and love already. Only wisdom and love knows how to honestly recognize, oh, honey, darling, I'm here for you. I see you. I see the suffering. And that's why I'm showing up, because I care. And immediately, right then, the heart that knows that there's hate isn't hate. Seeing hate honestly, seeing fear, feeling it, that's not fear and hate. That's wisdom and love. Only wisdom and love can have an honest, inclusive relationship with the hate, with the fear, with the distraction and denial, the closing down, identification with being the victim, being the one who needs, who's desperate, who's stingy, or whatever narrow, constricted space we can tend to be in. The Dharma move is so much more simple than we think. The wrong idea that takes us down the wrong road is to imagine I'm this really screwed up human being with all these habits of anger and hate and fear and greed and conceit and comparing mind. And I'm just so entangled with these bad habits. And I have to somehow find a way to get rid of all that conditioning picked up through our cultural conditioning process and through our parents and through our friends. And, we just, that sympathetic vibration with the ignorance, the kind of legacy of the pain and suffering. And we're, in a way, the body, sensitive heart and mind, we are the innocent victims of coming through being, we're conditioned by all of the pain of the past that wasn't met with wisdom and love. And just gets buried in our collective bodies, actual bodies, and then our cultural body. And then, it's just reverberating with the hate of racism and the hate of sexism and the, hate of having and fear of someone taking what I have, and that kind of contraction of not having, ideas of not having, being left out and wanting more. And we're all trapped, imprisoned by these patterns, all of us, regardless of our particular cultural locations around gender or whatever it might be, body size. But the move is quite simple. It's this, that just little by little, that's why we practice in these simple ways. We create a safe environment to practice, some corner of our home that's relatively uncluttered, in a comfortable chair, cushion, with our cell phones shut off, and our pets leaving us alone, and our partners and friends and people we live with leaving us alone for a period of time. And in that relative simplicity, we practice recognizing the capacity for wisdom and love. We follow the thread, the pleasure of freedom, of the heart that's realizes, I don't have to be afraid of being open. I don't have to be afraid of feeling here. And we practice relaxing, being love that loves for no particular reason. Wisdom that includes, wisdom that sees and feels clearly and deeply. We can't own this wisdom and love, but we can trust it. And that's the thing. We can't even own it enough to believe that I can, tell somebody about it. Like even the need to be able to talk about it with a friend can be a trap. Because what's the only thing that's actually relevant is to be able to trust it and to keep it in mind, because by trusting it and keep it in mind, that's what develops it. And it, over time, replaces the habit of abiding in these constricted places where the mind is under the influence of fear and greed and hate. This is from Sharon Salzberg's book, Loving Kindness, which is just a wonderful text. Sharon writes, the force of metta, loving kindness, allows us to cohere, to come together within ourselves, within all beings. So that's the flavor of that freedom. It has both the sense of not being burdened by the reality of the moment, but also and again, it's hard to talk about, it sounds like a paradox. So on the one hand, the heart is empty of that constriction, doesn't feel burdened, but on the other hand, the heart feels whole, inclusive, or unified, not apart, not separate. So it sort of feels like, well, if I really felt whole with the whole world, the truth of suffering and injustice would just break me apart. It would be unbearable. But that's not, paradoxically, that's not actually our experience as we keep in mind wisdom and love, as we cultivate it. It's both that sense of being right in the middle, that inclusive wholeness, non-fragmentation, non-division, but also at the same time, the heart unburdened. It's really free, the heart. It's a spiritual joy, that freedom of being unburdened. A lot of times, we have kind of a cynicism about when we hear, excuse me, somebody talking about love or freedom. And I remember sometimes we read, these kind of rare examples where this sort of interspecies child rearing, like a lion's cub, or a mother lion would raise, the cub or the baby of another species, because they can, and the child, the baby, whatever, zebra, shows up at just the right time. And it's easy for us to sort of cynically think, well, the motherly instincts of that animal just doesn't know better, like a dog, a female dog raises a kitten, or whatever it might be. It just takes them in and lets them drink the milk and so on. And it's just interesting to watch our mind when we would hear a story of this, like, something that's sort of sweet and could easily be interpreted in an idealistic way. Oh, I guess that mother dog just, was willing to go beyond their instincts to want to chase the cat or whatever it might be, and just have a loving relationship with the kitten, or whatever the particular story might be, right? But we want to look at these examples of at these examples as a sign that the heart doesn't have to be governed by its conditioning, right? That we can go beyond the reality of conditioning, and we're not negating our conditioning, like, oh, this is somebody on the inside circle and that's somebody over there on the outside of my circle of friends or circle of relatives. And just to see that, yeah, we need these different circles. We're going to use them in life, but to understand that they're a construction and they don't limit the heart. And it doesn't mean we're going to raise rattlesnakes and cuddle up with dangerous beings. It just means that the idea of throwing somebody out of our heart, it's actually just a functional thing. Like, how close should I be to somebody? It doesn't actually need to matter in terms of the heart's love. this sort of wise, inclusive, like we're all living beings here, doing the best we can. And it isn't easy being a living being. And there is, unfortunately, this inherent competitiveness, this, life eating life. This is a characteristic of where we find ourselves. And I don't have to be naive or in denial. And on the other hand, I don't have to throw anybody out of my heart. Even if you eat meat, why not be really appreciative of those creatures that lived, most of them in very terrible conditions, that we're eating? See, we're afraid to include them in our hearts because then we have to care. And this is the interesting little boundary we want to explore. Maybe we can care about everything. And maybe we can allow ourselves to be transformed by that tenderness, by that caring, by that open-heartedness. And maybe we don't even have to know where it's going to lead. Oh, no, I have to eat meat, or, I have to keep these people at some distance, like a homeless person that we see on the street, because if I interact with them, I don't know where that leads. Then I actually have to start caring about them. And I need to really stay focused on my own life. I don't really have the capacity. And I don't have any answers here, but except maybe to just explore the edges of the heart that can include not needing to throw anybody out of our hearts, and really just explore whether or not it's a functional way to be living our life. Like, don't out of habit conclude that we can't live in this inclusive, generous, open-hearted way, that somehow we'll end up dying a miserable death or something like that, be the doormat of the world and where everybody takes advantage of us. How do we know? And again, it's not like anybody is forcing us, but just to begin to explore the trustworthy experience of love and see where it takes us. I want to read a little bit from Aya Kema. I don't know if people know Aya Kema. She passed away maybe about 20 years ago, and a German woman who ordained, one of our first Westerners who ordained as a bhikkhuni, a fully ordained Buddhist nun, and was just a very impactful teacher here in the West. Started centers and influenced a number of the Western teachers. And she also wrote a number of books that I find quite good. This is from her book, Being Nobody, Going Nowhere. A wonderful title. And it's a chapter on the divine abodes of loving kindness and compassion and appreciative joy and equanimity. Our friendships are beset with the same difficulty, namely attachment. We are attached. We are attached to our friends. We don't want to lose them. We are nice to them, so they'll remain our friends. If they are not equally nice back to us, we immediately consider whether we should remain friends. We want the same friendship back, the same consideration and care. It turns into a commercial enterprise. And a little later in this chapter, she's talking about how we need to train the heart, because the habit around love is this love with attachment. So she writes, the heart needs training because it's by nature, it isn't constituted to always feel loving kindness. By nature, it contains both love and hate. It contains ill will, rejection, resentment, and fear, and also lovingness. But unless we diminish the hate and enlarge the love by doing something about it in our daily life, we have no chance of experiencing that peaceful feeling which loving kindness generates in the heart. Having love in one's heart, unconditional love for others, creates security in the heart. One knows how one is going to react. It can rely on oneself. One is totally reliable, having no fear. one knows that one is trained to the point where there isn't going to be any reaction of hate or anger, not even a little, to mar one's peacefulness. That is the first and foremost great result of having cultivated loving kindness in one's heart. Now, I want to say something here because obviously, for all of us, maybe, anger does arise, even those of us who've been practicing for a long time. But be honest now, like for myself, when anger or upset arises, very quickly, I care about that. So I might still have some anger towards somebody, but in a way, the mind drops that identification with I hate you to, there's hate here and I care about it. And it's a very natural way that wisdom diffuses the toxicity of hate. It isn't by being afraid of the hate or repressing anger. It's understanding, there's this heat of hate, there's this contraction of anger, and I care about it. And that diffusing of that toxicity of hate and anger really allows us to find other ways to let that energy move, because sometimes moments require a strong response, and that fierceness can come from the self-compassion of taking care of ourselves, not from wanting to kill somebody or get rid of somebody, squash somebody, which is what we feel like, even, surprisingly, with people we truly love. When anger gets triggered, it has this, real anger with identification has this capacity to want to burn it all down, even those ourselves and others that we care about, because anger with identification doesn't have any wisdom. So the first move is to realize this state of anger hurts and I care about it. And she goes on to write about how this is such a powerful training, learning how to meet anger, hate, fear with love, learning that we can always keep love in mind. And we know how to do it because it has the flavor of liberation. Love tastes like the freedom from hate, right? So if we know what the constriction of hate, wanting revenge, when we know what that prison feels like, then we can intuit the freedom of love, because it's the absence. It's really knowing the heart that's empty of hate, empty of that constriction of hate. In other words, it's open, it's inclusive, it knows how to say yes. So one more thing from Thich Nhat Hanh to end. He writes, we all have the seeds of love in us. We can develop this wonderful source of energy, nurturing the unconditional love that does not expect anything in return. When we understand someone deeply, even someone who has done us harm, we cannot resist loving them. The Buddha declared that the Buddha of the next eon will be named Maitreya, the Buddha of love. That will be the superpower. One of the things in the sort of Buddhist mythology or legends is, every Buddha, there's not just one. We just have the Buddha of our age who lived 2,500 years ago, Shakyamuni Buddha. And there are many Buddhas, of course. And then every Buddha has kind of their own personality, and what aspect of their personality really supported their own awakening. So the Buddha of this age that we know about was able to make tremendous effort. So he's considered, that was his personality strength. And what Thich Nhat Hanh is reporting in the tradition, the next Buddha, Maitreya, evidently is going to have this superpower in their personality of this unconditional love. So who knows, maybe we'll be around. But technically, you can't have a new Buddha until the teachings of the former Buddha have completely disappeared. And we have the good fortune of still having these teachings around. So anyway, please stay along for the small groups, but let me mention a few things that are coming up. This coming Saturday, Ramesh Sairam, one of our wonderful teachers in our community, will be leading a workshop that he's been doing for many years at the center, Mindfulness with Physical Pain. That's this coming Saturday, 1 to 4. You can sign up, go to our public calendar. I'll lead the half-day retreat this month on the 12th of February. Shelley, I think, will be leading the retreat at the end of the month and the half-day retreat in March. You can pay attention to that as we get closer. And there's a practice period at the retreat center that I'll be leading with a few other of our practice leaders, the 22nd through the 27th of February. I think there's 1 or 2 spots left for that.